My name's Stuart Broadley. I'm CEO of the EIC and delighted to be asked to chair this session today and to work with the wonderful people at OGV Energy. We have 5 brilliant panelists today who you will also hear from shortly. David Rennie from SDI, John Carpenter from Petrofac, BRITNEY HOUVET from ICR, ALLAN MERRITT from ALLAN, and Mike SIBSON from BGF. Special thanks to our 2 main sponsors today, Petrasco Energy, delivering rapid logistics solutions to the energy industry, and in fact the EIC that I am CEO of. We're also delighted to be supporting this event as the UK's largest energy trade group. We have 700 members. So welcome to OGV Energy's first monthly forum for the members of its new subscription service, OGV Community. And a big thank you to all of you for signing up and participating today. The idea behind the OGV Community is to provide its members with market insights, business development and networking opportunities, and increased brand exposure within the energy supply chain, especially, of course, in these challenging times where it's actually pretty hard to meet anybody face to face. Each month, OGV Energy will facilitate an online forum on the theme of OGV Energy magazine for its members, involving leaders from the energy sector. And after each monthly panel session, there will be an online networking opportunity, which we all hugely need, of course. That will be open to everyone to provide some business development opportunities. So today, we will be discussing international growth and diversification, which, well, if you know me, you'll know I'm incredibly passionate about these 2 topics. So let's set the scene. Most companies in the, at least oil and gas supply chain, already are exporters of some form or other. Well, not all, but those that are actually typically have 60% of their revenues in legacy exports. So export markets developed in those good days before the oil crash of 2014. Since 2014, though, most of those companies have chosen to not invest in new export markets. Perhaps only 10% of companies in the last 5 years have looked at exporting into new markets as a smart way to spend their money. But why is this? Particularly when we know that the UK market is shrinking, and it's shrinking fast. On top of that, again, looking at the supply chain in the UK, about half of them are currently growing, not by exports, but by diversifying. So that sounds good, right? Diversifying across the energy space. Well, not as much as you'd think. Most of that diversification is not happening in energy. It's actually diversification into non-energy sectors. So again, why is it that we are losing energy companies to non-energy sectors? And then, of course, if all of that wasn't difficult enough, of course, COVID makes business travel almost impossible right now and for the foreseeable future. So how do you, as an exporter, develop the next new export market? I always close this with something that DIT, Department of International Trade, will often say if you get an export minister. He will say, scratching his head about why companies are not exporting, that exporters are proven to have longer lives and to be more profitable. So good question. So these are the topics of today: internationalization and diversification. So I'm now delighted to welcome our panelists, and I'm going to start with our first panelist, and then each of them is going to go in turn. I'm not going to bore you with reading off long bios. I shall let each of them introduce themselves, and then each of them will also do a 2 to 5 minute introduction from their own point of view, their own view of the questions and the challenges around internationalization and diversification. So I'm delighted to start with ALLAN MERRITT from ALLAN. ALLAN, over to you.
We're based in Aberdeen. We're a mobile digital technology business. I guess what we do is provide mobility, that's probably the best way of describing it, mobile devices, software on mobile devices to workers in the field, wherever that may be, whether it's offshore, whether it's in the jungle, whether it's in the desert. Our traditional market has been oil and gas, but we're diversifying from that, and that's one of the things, of course, that we're discussing today. So be interested in participating in that discussion with regard to Aaron Lee's experiences, but also finding out what others are doing. As far as internationalization is concerned, we've actually just in the last few weeks committed to a new office in Houston. So we're now not only in Aberdeen, but in Houston also. Obviously with COVID, that office is currently empty, but you know, it was very important for us to show that intent. The majority of our business is international anyway. Even though we're based in Aberdeen, we have a pretty good solid market in the UK, but increasingly, and now the majority of our business is international. So for me, the topics of internationalization and diversification are very, very relevant to Aaron Lee and our growth plans. Well, what we're doing right now, but also our growth plans over the next 2 to 3 years.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alan. Great start. Carrying on in the same light, I'm now delighted to introduce BRITNEY HOUVET from ICR. BRITNEY.
Great. Just checking. Yeah, I'm not on mute.
You're on mute. That's it. That's it. Yeah, got it.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you for having me on the panel, first and foremost. I'm going to go into a little bit about my own background in terms of career history in relation to my international business development, and go into a little bit about what ICR are doing at the moment and what we've been doing over the past few years, going international and also diversifying. So first of all, in terms of my background, I started my career working for Caverna in international business development, which gave me quite a taste at a young age in how rewarding and exciting, but also challenging working internationally can be. I then moved to Petrofac, where I worked for 5 years within business development, mergers and acquisitions, and also strategy, and spent a lot of time in the Middle East, Mexico, and Norway, developing international business and relationships on a larger scale. So I got experience in the larger company there. I then worked for ProSafe Offshore at a very busy time in the oil and gas industry and looked after the Brazil market, as well as spending a lot of time in US and Norway. So I joined ICR coming up 3.5 years ago at a very exciting time for the business, as we were bringing together the 5 separate acquired companies, all with an integrity maintenance type space, under one roof, and we rebranded as ICR Integrity. We've spent a lot of time working on our growth strategy, and our 3 key areas have always included internationalization, diversification, and innovation, adding to our service offering. So as a business, we've actually worked internationally for many years and had already established partners around the world. We did, however, see the need to have further ICR hubs in key locations to continue our expansion, therefore set up a base in both Houston and the UAE, probably within the last 2 to 3 years, but in parallel, so it was quite an ambitious undertaking. We set up the US business with a local team, however, supported heavily from the resources in the UK, but we took a slightly different approach in Abu Dhabi and transferred one of our MDs, Alan Taylor, to the region to head up the business. We also transferred actually one of our regional sales managers, and he actually now heads up BD in the region as well. So we've now qualified several products and services with the likes of ADNOC and Abu Dhabi, but this process has taken a lot longer than expected, as do many things when you're developing new markets. In the US, we took a slightly different approach, and we've mainly leveraged our long-standing relationships with the IOCs in the UK to gain traction in the US, which is now working really well, and we've got contracts for the likes of Shell and BP. We often find that we need to qualify our products and services within a specific new region, even though we work with the same client in other regions. So they do seem to work on their own in each region. Because this all takes time, we don't limit ourselves to only these hubs. And as my team within the business development area, we are focused on new growth areas out with the hubs. where we feel our business will be successful. So the typical process is to partner with a local company with complementary skills to our business. And we will always supply the engineering from our headquarters in Aberdeen and materials, but what we tend to do is train the local partners to be able to do our installation work locally. And this has actually been really key to our success during the pandemic, where the international travels almost stopped for a while, but we were able to continue our growth with our partners in this way. We've also found business development to be quite challenging, not being able to travel to see clients face to face. Therefore, we've actually had to be quite innovative in our approach to developing new clients and seeking out new business. So we've turned our focus to digital marketing, trying to really up our game there. And we're doing things like podcasts, webinars, and even this type of thing. And we've also been doing things like performing training courses from afar, which we'd spoken about for a long time, but kind of never got there. But this has forced us into that, and it's actually working really well so far. We're also working with Scottish Development International, who are on the panel today, as part of the International Scale-Up Programme, where we were actually awarded a grant for the year to help our international business. They've been assisting us with things like research, due diligence on maybe new partners and opportunities, which has actually really helped us when working remote. So that's my summary and overview, but once again, thank you for having me on the panel, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Brittney, for doing a great job there. And before we go into our next panelist, of course, I just want to remind everybody listening in, this will be a Q&A pretty soon once we get through these opening statements. So please do start putting in your questions. The way to do that is to put questions in the chat section. Yeah, I mean, I will get going with some questions, fear not. But of course, we'd love to make this a much more immersive process, so please join in. Okay, with that, and without mute, I hope, let's now pass to John Carpenter from Petrofac. To you, John.
So again, thank you very much for the invitation today. So I'm John Carpenter. I'm the Group Head of Strategy and Transformation at Petrofac. I've kind of two responsibilities there. The first is helping transform Petrofac from being an oilfield services company into an energy services company. And secondly is how we, the transformation of how we deliver our services, so the use of digital technology, robotic process automation and data science to improve how we actually deliver for our clients as well. So quick 2 minutes on Petrofac for those of you who don't know us. We're a provider of services across the life cycle of assets, from concept and feed through to EPC, particularly in the Middle East, CIS regions, which is probably what we're best known for, through to then operations and maintenance, which is obviously our biggest business in the UK, wells, training and decommissioning as well. So you're based all around the world, about 11,000 people today, 5.5 billion of revenues last year. And we're also on our own kind of transformation journey internally. We've reduced our kind of emissions footprint 56% since 2015, and recently committed to being Scope 1 and Scope 2 net zero by the end of 2030. So I thought I'd bring just a little bit of perspective on internationalization and diversification from the kind of perspective of a larger company. So I suppose some observations on going international that we've kind of seen over the last few years, and certainly in my tenure at Petrofac. I think first of all, every time we do this, you have to remind everyone to be patient. It takes time to get set up, get registered with clients, networking, understanding supply chain, contracting norms, getting into the kind of local market. So don't expect kind of results overnight. We're still a very relationship-centric industry, and we're also still quite risk-averse. So it takes time for people to kind of welcome new entrants in. I think secondly, then be picky with partners. Really do your diligence. Look for complementary skills, relationships, and particularly values. If you get the right partner, you can have an absolutely fantastic journey, create loads of value, really expand your reach. If you don't get the right one, it can take up a lot of time. Also, partnerships either end kind of one or two ways. It either becomes something more, or it kind of it dissolves for one reason or another. So always kind of be conscious of how it might end up at the end as well. Think about that from the start. A third thing, which I think I'd really kind of emphasise to us as a kind of UK companies, really leverage the UK PLC. The UK government particularly is really keen to help British companies get kind of into the export market and get overseas. So reach out to the embassy network, use them to help you get networked, understand the lay of the land, get involved in any of the kind of UK kind of local country industry or kind of business forums, And if you have access to them and you're kind of exporting products and services, get in touch with UK Export Finance via the Treasury, and they can see if they can get you any financing support for some of the work that you're doing. And finally, then be aware of kind of how you're going to maximize local content. This has always been a big kind of differentiator for Petrofac, but it's something I think every company can do. It's becoming a much bigger decision criteria as we go kind of overseas. That contribution that you bring to the local economy, employment, to the use of kind of goods and services kind of locally. And it can, as I say, really kind of differentiate your offering. Going international, it's not easy, even for big companies. We've recently kind of stepped back into the US in a big way in the last kind of couple of years. And it really took us time to find the right management team and the right kind of platform to build from. So as I say, be patient. Secondly, then just a few words on diversification. So I was brought up on a kind of school of thought around kind of capabilities-driven strategy. So try and understand the 2 or 3 things that you're really good at. It's probably only a couple of key kind of elements. And then look for step outs that really allow you to leverage those kind of unique capabilities and add values into kind of adjacent areas. So, at the moment, Petrofac's obviously looking at how we can use some of our kind of capabilities, particularly in engineering and project delivery and operations, to move into the renewable space, which is, I think, becoming a requirement ultimately for our industry to maintain its social license to operate. We're very fortunate in the oil and gas sector that we've got some really fantastically skilled and expert people who've got kind of amazing skills and capabilities at designing, building, operating really complex kind of engineering projects. And that skill set is equally applicable in renewables and other kind of process industries as it is in the energy sector. So, try and understand, where your particular kind of skill sets and opportunities, adjacencies really might kind of lie. I think we've got an enormous opportunity as an industry to be at the forefront of the energy transition as a result, show the power of good that we can do, and ensure that we're at the forefront of addressing climate change and driving a more circular economy as well. So with that, I'll hand back to Stuart. Looking forward to the questions later.
Okay. I'm not on mute, am I? Just checking. I know I'm not. So good. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, John. That's really helpful, actually. I've got quite a few questions coming through in my mind already. And just a reminder to everybody listening in, honestly, we are starting to get a couple in, which is great. But please start thinking about tough questions for the panel. Okay, delighted now to go to Mike SIBSON from BGF. Mike, to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Mike SIBSON. I head up BGF's office in Aberdeen, cover the north of Scotland, and of course, predominantly oil and gas, historically in Aberdeen, although we do all sectors. So we do have other types of investments, care homes and recycling businesses and all sorts. BGF is a UK-wide investor in the growth economy of the UK, so predominantly in private companies. We do invest in some AIM-listed businesses, and we do everything from venture stage through to quite mature businesses. In Aberdeen, we probably have the most international portfolio of the offices in the UK, simply because of the oil and gas content. Key areas are usually Middle East, so Middle East and the US for oil and gas, occasionally Singapore and the Far East. So we have a portfolio, I think, of 13 companies, and through that get a reasonable amount of experience of the pros and cons of opening up internationally. My background is I was originally a drilling engineer. I worked with Shell in Congo and Angola mostly. And then I've been an investor for 20 years, of which most of that has been based out of Aberdeen. So I've seen the pitfalls again and again. And just listening to Jonathan, it's actually quite reassuring that it's the same issues for a big company like Petrofac compared with the smaller companies that we invest in. I mean, I think our SMEs are very good at internationalization. But then many of the same issues that Jonathan raised. It takes a long time. One of our CEOs who has a successful business in the Middle East says, don't expect to be established for 5 years. Typically, a country entry plan would be a year of spending money and then start making money in year 2. I think it's pretty rare to see a company making money inside 3 years of a country entry. It does happen occasionally. And it's just simply some things are very difficult. You got to get the right licenses, open bank accounts, all those things just take time, take ages in some cases, in some countries. I think the second thing is it is difficult to find the right people. Many of our companies have 1 or 2 false starts. It takes a lot of commitment from management and CEO to spend time, to meet people, to network, and to get it right. And that requires a lot of time on the ground. And there's no way around that. And in one case, our CEO has actually moved to the US because we had several false starts, and actually that's driven a really good business there. And the third one, again, as Jonathan said, finding a local partner. It's tempting to go with one who's recommended by somebody else, but actually partners come in all shapes and sizes, particularly in the Middle East, and everything from a post box through to somebody who expects to do all of your market and go-to-market strategy and everything in between. And as Jonathan says, it's actually quite hard to get out of a relationship with a partner, particularly when they're more involved in your business. So doing the due diligence and making sure that you've got the right person is really important. So it needs a lot of stamina. And you then say, well, why bother? And I guess it's because it's worth it. As Stuart said, these markets are much bigger than the UK, where the market is actually pretty static, in some cases growing, in a lot of cases declining. Often much better growth dynamics, much bigger markets, and in some cases we expect the US or Middle East business to be much bigger than the original UK business that we invested in. So it is worth it, and I think it can drive shareholder value, and it can really make a big difference to a business. But it just takes time, and it requires a lot of commitment and stamina.
Okay, thank you, Mike. It sounds tough. So I'm hoping there are people that have questions for Mike around this. So they must, because they make money. This is what their business model is, helping companies to do this around the world. So how do they make money? So I think that I'm hoping people will have questions to really channel in on, why do we do it still if it's so hard? Now, of course, one of the people, our last panelist, who many of you may know, and he probably, of course, is one of those people that has got more experience than most in helping companies to export with huge amounts of success. So delighted to hand over to our final panelist, David Rennie from SDI.
Bit of a build-up there, Stuart, but I'll do my best. Hello, everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces and indeed names down the right-hand side. I hope you're all well. Thanks for the chance to speak. I'll focus largely, because I think a lot of the points we've made are really good, and I don't want to sort of repeat them. I'll focus a bit more about SDI, Scottish Development International, who we are and what we do. And as you've said, some people indeed on the panel and indeed on the right-hand side have hopefully benefited from our work. So for those of you who don't know, Scottish Development International, SDI, we're the trade and investment agency, if you like, of the Scottish Government. Think of us as the international arm of Scottish Enterprise as well. It's two sides of the same coin. I head up the global trade team for energy. So I have a team based around the globe with 5 team leaders, also scattered around the globe, whose job it is to help Scottish companies export in the energy space. And we do that through a whole myriad of ways. In the old days, we used to have missions and events. We've recently, of course, like everybody else, been doing a lot of webinars and sort of market intelligence work. We are in-market specialists in particular, spend a long time. These are people based overseas. These are people who build relationships with key companies we target. Companies are, big projects, undertaking some new activity, and we try and get close to them, understand their needs, and then try and match that up to Scottish capability. We offer a lot of work around international strategy workshops to help companies think about some of those strategic questions. We also have our Global Scot network that many of you will have benefited from, which are sort of a alumni of sort of high-performing, high reputation Scots, or at least people with an affinity for Scotland, and they can offer mentoring, they can open doors, they can even help us actually to open doors as well. So that's very useful. sort of source of information as well. And of course, and this has already been mentioned already on today, we, I have a team of 29 people, I think it is, around the globe. But, the world's a big place, right? So if SDI doesn't have a foot on the ground in a certain market, often we use, Jonathan mentioned this, the embassy network, the UK equivalent of ourselves, DIT, etc. We use the good resources of EIC and many other trade partners to help us, or other partners to help us as well. UK Export Finance was mentioned. Chambers, particularly in Aberdeen, Russell Worthwaite, many of you will know Russell and his team, very active, particularly in the world of export documentation, and with Brexit coming, and maybe I win the prize for the first mention of Brexit 27 minutes in. A lot of work going on the chambers are doing, Business Gateway, etc. Just to be clear, as SDI, our model right now is we work with what we call the top 1,200. The majority of our time is on the top, what we call the top 1,200. What I mean by that is the analysis of exporting data that we're lucky enough to see allows us to know who the most significant exporting companies are based in Scotland. So we focus on the top 1,200 exporting companies. In energy, about 300. So there's about 300 of those top 1,200 account for in energy. The majority of our time is focused on supporting those 300 companies because, in essence, the return of £1 of support from us for a top 300 or a top 1,200 is bigger than £1 spent on other companies. Having said all that, we also, and we're at the moment, we're spending a lot of time and money and focus on a kind of one-to-many type approach. So, if you're not in the top 300 or 1,200, you can still get help from us, okay? It'll be a different type of help, but you'll still get help from us. And over the next few months, we're going to be doing a lot of work. We're redesigning our website. We're doing a lot of focus on e-commerce, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a sort of two broad models there. So for those of you who have a named, what we call a trade specialist, which is somebody in my team that many of you will know the names of my team. If you work with those individuals, then you may not know this, but you're one of Scotland's leading exporters. But as I say, we're really looking to also work with as many companies as we can. We have limited resources like everybody else, so we can't help every single company, but we want to help as many companies as much as we can. My final thought before I hand back to Stuart is, to use a phrase that someone once used, there is no alternative to internationalization and diversification. The nature of our own domestic economy, the opportunities are out there. The fact that energy still and will be for some time is a huge asset for Scotland and the UK. It's a changing asset as we move into that energy transition agenda. So there is really no alternative for the continued path on international. And this sector actually is one of the success stories in terms of internationalization. If you compare us to some other sectors, both the number of companies we export and the percentage of revenue that comes from export markets is very high compared to some other markets. So that's a good place to start from, I guess. But we want to help more companies export, and we want to help those companies already exporting do even better. And we'll get into this, no doubt, in the question conversation part of today. But there are still a lot of opportunities out there. I mean, we still, even right now, China, for example, is still some really interesting opportunities in offshore wind, hydrogen in Europe, Japan offshore wind. We are still getting and building relationships and opportunities for the companies we work with. So tough though it is, and obviously the opportunities are much lower than they were, but they still are out there. So back to you, Stuart.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I think we've had a really great start in terms of picking out different perspectives on this topic of internationalization. I think particularly also diversification somewhat. We are getting some questions coming in. I promise you I will get to those questions. David, you've got a couple of SDI fans in the chat box I'm seeing in here, because there's a lot of questions about SDI. So I promise you we will come to that.
Those were not planted, I can assure you, Stuart.
Yeah. So do you know what I want to do first, though, is I want to get back to this question of, it's great to have some panelists that obviously believe in exports, but the truth is there are so many companies right now that finding exports really hard to do. And so I guess I'm going to start, Alan, with you around, you know, is it harder than ever now to find the time and the money to develop a new export market? And if so, why?
Is it? I would say I would actually say, from our experience at ALLAN, that it's no more difficult now than it was even pre-COVID. Perhaps it's the nature of our business. It's a digital business, and one of the consequences that I think we'd all, well, I say we'd all agree, but maybe others might have a different view, but is that digitalization and the use of digital tools is even more important and increasing actually during COVID, because of the things that we've just spoken about. As a result of COVID, we can't travel as much as we, physically travel as much as we would have wanted. Of course, if COVID hadn't happened, we'd be spending a lot more time visiting the locations that we're doing business in or want to do business in. But we're on Hop In, Zoom, Teams, other forms of communication.
But Alan, you're still largely working in existing export markets with these products, or are you actually using it to develop brand new export markets?
We're getting into new export markets. One of the things that actually BRITNEY mentioned, which is part of our strategy as well, is partnering. And, we've got our head of BD for Americas, who's involved in, finalizing our partnering strategies for the Americas. So I think markets, but in new markets, for example, we're having some success with that in South America. We have one or two bits of business there right now, but there are new areas, in particular within the energy area, where we're getting some success through partners, and we're able to communicate with those partners just as well during COVID, if not better.
Right, so that's a really nice segue. And BRITNEY, I will come to you then, actually, because in fact you've got questions coming in here. Alvaro from SDI is asking about this work you've done in Houston, kind of how did you find a partner, and just talk a bit about how actually having a partner is perhaps one of the ways that you don't need to travel if you have a good enough partner.
Yeah. I guess I'll start by saying, actually in Houston, we decided to grow organically, which was one of the first times we'd done that. Typically, we'd always partnered, but we felt the US market was large enough, and it also had a lot of IOCs and the clients that we work with in the UK. So we thought we'd actually do that organically, which, like everyone has spoken about, is much harder than just saying it. Actually having a sales office, getting a warehouse set up, getting a local team to fully understand our products and services and sell them has taken many years, actually. And we used help from the SDI in the very beginning, and we got a grant to fund business development trips and also help fund some of the local recruitment in the beginning. That is going really well now, but it's still taking a lot of dedication from our UK sort of heads of sales, who are quite technical experts in their field. So for example, many trips to Louisiana, many trips to Houston. We had looked at the Permian, Louisiana, Houston. You almost forget how big America is. It's not just like Aberdeen, going to one place and you can almost see all your clients in a day or two. 1 week sales trip, you might only get to Louisiana. So we didn't maybe realize how much travel and work it would be, but we are finally now up and running. I guess
now, BRITNEY, that you can't travel, how are you doing that?
So luckily, we had actually been doing this over the last few years. So we're able now to rely on Teams calls, lots of different types of meetings like this. So actually, we don't need to do as much travel now, which is good. And actually, the local team there are now set up enough and knowledgeable enough that they are able to really push the local market, which was always the plan, to try and get that local setup so they can sort of be autonomous to the UK. We will always do the engineering in Aberdeen, most likely, but they're now set up with their local technicians to be able to supervise jobs, train local companies, They've got their own sales teams, their own sort of account management and that type of thing. So the US is now pretty much set up and just needs the support via Teams and things from the UK, which was really good timing actually with the travel. But then you take the likes of Trinidad. Now, we were never going to probably set up our own office in Trinidad. So a few years ago, I went out to Trinidad, met a local company recommended by somebody, but of course we did our own due diligence. We went there, we did the local oil show with them, which again was a really good opportunity to meet with their clients, see how well they were networked. And actually, as ICR's business, we don't export everything. We actually have a number of services and products that we offer. But what we find is it's much easier to export certain things. So like our Techno app, which is a composite repair, we find that actually quite an easy thing to export because we can do the engineering in Aberdeen, we can train a local partner, and we can supply them materials. And then they get up to speed, you know, to the supervisor level of being able to manage their own jobs. Whereas maybe something like our chemical injection utilities, where you need more facilities, that's going to be slightly harder to go as far. You would need a lot of setup. So we've honed into the areas of our business that are easier to export. We focus on them more maybe short term, and then we look at strategically thinking of, will there be other bits that we want to internationalize as well?
Great. There's quite a lot of things you brought up there. So I'm going to go, what I'm going to do is go to John now. Just firstly, lift up a little bit and just say from a larger company point of view, and actually I'm going to pick up on a question we've had from Mark Skinner, who says to regionalize has never been so important regards the countries or regions themselves to develop in. So I guess it's this process of, you know, how do you choose, how do you target? And I guess, is it the same whether you're a small or a large company? That is still one of the most important things, is to make the right decision at that early stage. So John, develop that.
Yeah, so I think, as I was kind of saying before, you know, understanding, you know, what are the things that make your services kind of unique or differentiated, and how do those kind of characteristics play into certain markets? So, you know, understanding what's the nature of the kind of contracting model, what kind of standard kind of commercial models being used in certain markets, risk appetites, and things like the degree of localization kind of requirement as well. So there are some markets where they don't care so much about localization. So it's very easy to enter. If you can do your engineering in Aberdeen, you can find a local partner, train them up. That's kind of one way that you can go out there. There'll be other markets where you need to put kind of proper boots on the ground, and you know, actually build more kind of locally, organically, to kind of show that you're kind of adding value to the local kind of community, local industry. So kind of understanding some of those kind of differences in markets, what effectively the cost and how adaptable your kind of services or products are to those markets. Also things like kind of standards. So you know the standard for a valve in one market might be different to the standard in a different market, and it might be client specific as well. You know, one NOC has a different kind of set of standards and requirements than a different NOC. So you know, there might be next door countries, but you know they might have very different approaches to kind of qualifying you as a supplier. So kind of really being able to kind of work through that, understanding effectively what are the kind of therefore where's the easiest kind of routes in, where you can get to that kind of volume and scale as quickly as possible. You know, even at the kind of, you know, we're a big company, but we still, you know, think in that way as we're looking to enter markets. You know, where is it, you know, which services of ours are easier to get into? You know, how can we learn our way into those markets, maybe using a low risk service profile? So you know, we do lump sum EPC contracting, which is about as risky as you get. But actually what we do most of the time is go in first with an engineering offer, then maybe build it up to a kind of PMC type offer, which is still kind of reimbursable. Then maybe we do some lump sum engineering and procurement before we go and take the full wrap on a kind of full EPC execution. So also thinking about that kind of roadmap of how you're going to develop your products and services based on kind of characteristics of that market as well. I think it's kind of quite important to take consideration.
Yeah, you've got to have a country plan, haven't you? I think, and so Mike, this plays directly onto what you were saying, and I do want to just kind of ask the direct question, which is, so your business model is helping companies, SMEs, to internationalize, and you talked openly, I think, about how it's not easy and it takes time, but obviously something you passionately believe in. Ultimately, why do you believe so much in exporting? Is it the money that you make? Is it the de-risking because you have more options to make money from more countries? Why export?
yes, all of those things. I think it's simply about the size of addressable market. And I think looking back in history, the UK and Aberdeen in particular, whether you look at the oil industry or you look at broader industrial developments, we are very innovative, and we solve challenging problems. In the North Sea, we solved the subsea challenges and the harsh weather environment challenges and big platforms and all of those things. And that was something that we then exported, that knowledge and that know-how and those skills around the world. And I think that remains the case, that we have a pool of very talented, experienced engineering, technical people, yet our market is relatively small. So simply by logic, we need to be in other markets and other countries. And if we do that, we create a more diversified business, and ultimately one that's much more valuable, because when people buy a company, they are buying the future potential. They're not buying the company as it is today. And if the future potential is much bigger and brighter and international, then the company will naturally be worth a lot more money. I mean, the other element, just in terms of entry strategies that we haven't discussed, as an aside, is following a customer. And a number of our companies have been asked by customers to go, can you do the same service for us in America or Middle East or Brazil or wherever it might be? And that is a tried and tested route, where you have an anchor customer that gets you a foothold, which gives you the time then to recruit good people, and the people on the ground get to know who the good people are. And that is a tried and tested route to internationalize. But sorry, Stuart, that was an aside, but hopefully answered both questions.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's really good. And so, David, I am going to pick up on a couple of the questions that have been aimed at SDI and the services provided. Everybody's really kind of very complimentary of the services as well. So, well done for the work you and your global team are doing.
Yeah.
How do you? But I am going to ask you a tough question, which is the 300 companies. How do you get on that list? And because I'm sure there are companies would love support, and kind of how do you know that a company could be a great exporter if they're not on your list, and how do you bring in new exporters?
So, first part of the question is, to get in the 300 list, you need to export. You need to have a track record, if you like. In all seriousness, you need to have you need to already be exporting. And this is, I mean, this is a fairly new approach for us, actually. Driven by various things in the last couple of years. So, there are certain criteria you need to meet in terms of level of export, turnover, and so on. I mean, I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody, either here or perhaps offline. If a company thinks that they meet certain criteria to be on that 300,
well, there's course
more than happy to do it.
There is networking after this. So exactly. So I guess after this, if people want to ask, they can contact.
And please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that's the majority. It is a majority, but it's not all of our focus. So I would say roughly about 75 to 80% of our time and my team's time is spent on that 300 in terms of the people who are based in Scotland. Right. So what we have, trade specialists and Murray and Ian and others are examples of that. They will have a portfolio of about, what varies, but maybe 40, 50, sometimes more, sometimes less, companies that they have that relationship with. So their focus is very much on those, 40, 50 companies, whatever. But it's the 300 is not set in stone, right? Some fall off, some come on. So it's a pretty much, we review it on a kind of rolling basis. And I'm really keen, as I said in the chat, to get more energy companies, because the criteria really relates to turnover levels and export levels. And of course, energy is a relatively, easy, but it's an easier bar to reach from the energy sector compared to some other sectors, just because of the nature of the industry, I think. So we're really looking. And then what we're also saying, as I said earlier, through a kind of one-to-many approach, we really want to work, and we've got another sort of process going on at the moment where we're identifying sort of fast-growing companies who are likely to be on the 300 of the future, if you like. So again, if companies or anybody on the call wants to have a conversation about, well, my exports have really increased a lot in the last few years. Here's my criteria. Here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to be at. Then I'm happy to have that conversation. But again, You know, there are many other things that we can do with companies, whether it's market intelligence. You don't have to be on the 300, for example, to get access to our Global Scot network. You know, you don't have to be in our 300 network number, sorry, to get access to some market research, or to, you know, to talk to some of our colleagues. So, you know, some of our services are focused on 300, a lot of our services are focused on not. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the 300 and whether you're on it or not. And I would hope that we would be in a position, I think we're in a position, and thanks again for the comments, that even if you're not in the 300, but you want to be, we can work with you in order to get you to a certain place in the future, because that's important as well. You know, as well as we've got to keep a sort of pipeline. You know, I'm particularly keen on this, as some of my team know, that, you know, we need to be getting more companies on that 300. So that I want the energy to be 350. I want the energy to be. We won't be talking about the 400 energy, not the 300 energy.
Okay, and I think everybody listening in, and that's exactly what I'm hearing. The message here is more companies needed, and so I'm not surprised that it's 300, and it should be 400, 500, 600, because the research we do does show that at least in the last 5 years, companies have found new export development really hard. And so if I can just ask the rest of the panelists, just put up your hand, I guess, if you've got a comment about, and this is really responding to Murray Bainbridge's question around, you know, thanks, you know, for the comments about things that agencies like SDI, DIT, EIC are doing well, but are there things that could be done better? So I guess, does any in the panel want to comment on that experience that you've had where there's more that could be done? David, you're not allowed to answer this, you see. Anybody else want to comment? Alan, you want to have a go?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that, well, the short answer is I'm not quite sure, but what I can say, and I was speaking to David about this just before we came onto the session, is that I think I mentioned up front that we have just opened an office in Houston, and we've had great support from SDI to do that. In fact, we're in the SDI hub in Houston, so they are our landlord in Houston right now. So there's nobody in the office, funnily enough, given the current situation. So you know, we're finding that we're getting good support from them right now. I guess certainly from our point of view, we've looked at the opportunities that are available through SDI, through Scottish Enterprise. Jonathan mentioned it earlier about, in fact, David had mentioned, just as an aside, David had mentioned, it was 27 minutes in when he mentioned Brexit. I think in Jonathan's defence, I think he mentioned it first.
Oh, apologies, Jonathan, apologies.
Sorry, but yeah, and Jonathan was talking about that in the context of the UK government and the UK government. I was going to say equivalent agencies, but there are other agencies. They're the DTI or whatever to tap into, and you know, I've spoken to them over the years, whether it's through Arnley or in the previous life, and I've had limited, you know, some good advice and some good experience with them. But I must say, in recent years, I haven't, you know, maybe it's got more to do with me than anything else, but I haven't had too much experience of dealing with them. In light of Brexit, there's maybe a reason there, and maybe they're more willing under the.
There's a sense perhaps that they're busy doing other things, and I mean, what my experience certainly ask you don't get, and that's definitely true. You know, DIT, SDI, and others doing amazing work, but they are busy. They have limited resource, and companies do have to go out there and get involved, get stuff. Now that finish this session before we go into networking at 3:15, and we haven't really got into diversification yet. So, David, I know you want to start. Maybe we can pick up what you were going to say anyway in the diversification, because it's linked, of course, to internationalization. But I'm going to go, John, to you now. So obviously everybody's talking about energy transition. How real is it, you know, for a business that actually needs profitable revenue growth now. Is energy transition real, or is it just a hyper topic that everybody's talking about but nobody's doing?
So I would say it is quite real. Certainly in the UK. I mean, we're already one of the world's leaders in offshore wind. I think that's probably in the UK context, that's the kind of most real. So there's a question from John McDonald, you know, what's the experience of kind of getting into renewables, particularly in Scotland? You know, that's one market. It's real, it's material, you know, billions of pounds of spend already going into that. And it's going to grow at an absolutely phenomenal rate over the next kind of decade or two. What I would say just on that, though, is it is a different sector that you're kind of pushing yourself into. So we're coming from what very high kind of engineering complexity, process safety issues with oil companies. They're used they were used to a high oil price and therefore some pretty high returns into effectively the utilities market, which is used to working. It's more like downstream. It's kind of razor thin margins. Every single penny is counted. And, you know, even to the point where, you know, as Petrofac's looking to bring some of its services onshore rather than offshore, you know, getting to understand a different contracting form. So, you know, we use Logic offshore, but we're looking at NEC 4 and FIDIC contracts onshore. You know, that's something that's, you know, new for us to a degree. So just kind of understanding, therefore, the different kind of risk profiles associated with some of those contracts and how we manage around that. So it's not a straightforward task, but I would say the market is there and growing. Certainly in a UK context, I think there's a lot of, you know, really strong tailwinds that are going to help us. Obviously, huge government support now for kind of carbon capture and storage. We're expecting to see, you know, government come out to market with its hydrogen strategy, probably within kind of by the end of this year, hopefully. And that we're expecting, you know, given what the kind of European hydrogen strategy is, we're expecting to see something pretty ambitious from the UK government as well. And we've got, you know, particularly given the geology of the UK, you know, we've got some of the best carbon stores in the world. So doing blue hydrogen, you know, hopefully we'll be able to kind of tack that on to our big kind of CCUS ambition as well. That's, you know, while that is kind of big in number and potential, you know, there's not a lot there today, though, it has to be said. I think another interesting one where the UK is trying to carve out a bit of a kind of at the front of the pack, maybe not a leadership position, is around sustainable fuels as well. So we've already got a renewable transport fuel obligation in the UK. That's starting to drive some really interesting project work, looking at how you can use waste and turn it into either energy or fuels and that kind of other sustainable fuel sources. And the UK is set up this Jet Zero Council as well to look at how we can get sustainable jet fuel into the market. That's certainly, if we get that going in the UK, that really would put us in the global leadership position as well. So I think the market is definitely coming towards us. There's, you know, one big material sector today for us, but I'm expecting to see a few more. And I think the really exciting thing is obviously those skill sets are then eminently exportable overseas. You know, the stuff that we've built our kind of wind business where we're doing the kind of transmission platforms and starting to do some O&M. You know, that's now expanding into Europe first and foremost, but we're now starting to see the US market open up. Some of the Asian markets kind of start to open up, and they're going to need exactly the same skill sets and exportability, much as we've done in oil and gas. You know, taking, you know, skill sets from Aberdeen and taking them around to the world. It might just be a slightly different set of countries than we're used to with a kind of oil and gas patch kind of mindset. So I think we've got a lot of the skills and capabilities, but we just need to recognize it is a slightly different industry sector. And so some of the drivers are going to be a little bit different.
Brittney, I've got a tough question for you here, which is one of my own. So oil and gas focused company largely today. When you look at the behavior, and I mean this in the sense of massive changes in philosophy and messaging that's coming from IOCs right now, BP, Shell and others, who are all under shareholder pressure to change their business models completely. This must be hugely disruptive for a business like yours, who's trying to work out how do you keep the relationship you have with them, adapt to what they want, and yet actually what they're talking about, they don't have any business yet in that area, and yet what they do have business, you're not allowed to talk to them about it. So how do you bridge this gap between the fast changing and quite complicated and confusing messaging with actually getting on and doing the normal business?
Yeah, I guess there's a few elements.
You're muted.
Oh, am I?
That's it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess there's a few elements.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's just a delay. Yeah, you're good.
Delay. I guess to start off with, one of the things I'm finding going really internationally to markets, say in Asia or India, India is one of our key regions that's all of a sudden become quite interesting for us, is we are still very much working in the brownfield oil and gas space. Assets need maintained. Not everybody is going through the decommissioning process as much as, say, the UK. So we actually are still finding really quite large opportunities for our scale in these international locations, whether it be West Africa right now, but a lot of work coming out of Angola. Like I say, India, we're starting to look more at Asia, even the likes of Trinidad, Canada. So because we are really quite global, we're not in this UK-centric area where we're really pushing towards energy transition or even the decommissioning side. What we also find is, yes, some of our services probably just are not within that space. But one of the things in terms of our diversification is we do have a number of companies, like I said, we acquired. So our company based down in England, they've always been into defense. Our biggest contract is in defense, in nuclear. And what we're trying to do is actually pull your very much oil and gas centric businesses into those businesses. So again, diversifying the company even more. We also acquired a drone company last year, Sky Futures. Again, probably in our heads thinking that might fit into the oil and gas, but what that's opened up is a telecoms business. And we were awarded a really large contract or partnership deal with a large telecoms global company. So probably through a bit of acquisition, through our international growth strategy, and also our businesses being a little bit diverse, all within a space, but quite diverse, I guess we're having to put enough efforts into these areas to touch on the diversification as well as internationalization, which sort of come hand in hand. That's probably how we as a business are working on it right now.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. Mike, I'm going to try and give you also a pretty tough question, which is which markets right now in the world are hot? Because, okay, I mean here as in, potentially exciting, maybe, still a bit more profit there, maybe accessible in terms of the COVID world. And, you're working all over the world with many, many SMEs. Share your secrets. Which country or markets are you most excited about right now?
I would say sectors across the whole economy, the most exciting ones are all anything to do with online and IT services and online sales, and anything in the IT and the online world is very good. Anything in the physical shops, bars, restaurants, offices, anything in that world is as you'd expect, pretty dire. That would be a general sector-based answer. In terms of market-based, I was thinking somebody had asked in the questions: has anyone actually done a market entry remotely during COVID time? And I think the answer for us is no. I can't think of one where we have. Markets are pretty much closed down. Getting in is very difficult physically, and setting up somewhere without being able to go there is, I'd say, incredibly difficult unless you had a customer. I think it would be extremely hard. I think one thing came out the first half of the discussion is just the need for shoe leather and travel and work and commitment. And I think Brittney mentioned that, and Jonathan as well. So no, haven't seen people setting up remotely. I'd say. What
about which regions are you most excited about?
Yeah, well, from an oil and gas and energy point of view, I think I'd agree with Brittney that not everywhere has the same emphasis on the energy transition as we might have in Northern Europe. And the world is going to be, any projections of oil and gas demand show it's still increasing for the next 5-10 years, depending on globally, depending on the projections. And where's that going to come from? Well, most likely the US market. I think the offshore world in the US continues on. The onshore world has been very difficult over the last year. The midstream in the US still carries on, and some of our companies have been doing very well. We have a pipeline repair business, for example, that does very well in the midstream US. I'd say, where's the real production going to come from? Probably the Middle East, and actually that is going to be continue to be a growth area and continue to be an area where we can find markets for our technology. But as we've discussed before, it's not straightforward.
No, thank you. And Alan, I just want to pick up on a comment that's come in from Mark Skinner again, which is kind of a very direct question, which is, without any expositions, conferences right now, how to do business development? I mean, is it just simply digital and LinkedIn? Which I think from Mike saying there, he hasn't actually yet seen any breakthroughs with that on its own. It's not enough, right? So without expositions, conferences, and travel, how to win business. And I guess I'm trying to ask this in the adult way. So not the generic, well, it's fine, it's working, but we all know it's not really working. So, actually, in reality, how to win business without those face-to-face encounters.
We're a digital business anyway, so we're used to provide.
But you still had to meet people to sell it, right?
Absolutely.
So you didn't sell digitally.
Absolutely. But one thing that, we spoke about this a little bit earlier, that partnering as well. We've actually just won some business, which is both international and diversifies us at the same time, because it's in the shipping business. It's slightly related to oil and gas, in so much as it's in the marine industry, where they're converting vessels from diesel or older fuel sources to LNG. So they're taking a greener view on things, and they're using our mobile software to help them around the inspection piece on their vessel. That's a new contract that we just won in the last month during COVID.
But that was because of partnering.
Because of partnering. And
how did you find the partner? Is it a new partner, or was it one you already had?
It's a partner. It's a relatively new partner that we got to know pre-COVID, but that we've developed the relationship further during COVID.
And I think that, Alan, and sorry to rush you, I'm just aware that we need to wrap up soon, but I think that's an extremely important point, which is partnering now, whether you've had them or whether you need them, is critical. And so, David, I want to come to you with the question around the changing role of government in this situation in terms of helping companies. This must be one of the fundamental needs of business now, which is something you wouldn't have focused on so much in the past, which is the supporting the selection of the finding selection and the sharing of good experiences of partners and so on. Is this something now that you think the embassies and SDI can do more with?
Yeah, I think so. And the point I maybe should have made earlier was, we, as a team, we're much bigger than we were a few years ago, right? So, and the majority of that resource is what we call in market. So it's people based overseas. And one of the reasons we've done that is because these people, it's much easier and better to have knowledge of a particular market if you're there than if you're sitting in Scotland or whatever. So yes, the short answer to your question, Stuart, is I think we have probably seen an increase in the last few months of those type of questions. How do I find a partner? Help me find a partner. We've always had those sort of questions about agents and so on. But I think that, the frequency and number of those requests has increased. So I think we are, trying to answer that question where we can, and trying to help. There's still lots to be done, due diligence wise by the companies themselves, of course. But what we can do is open doors. Even our global Scots, I think, are useful in this regard. They'll have experience of partners and ways of working and the best way to do that. So yeah, I think it is something that's changing a bit, and I guess that's an ask or one change of the last few months, that there will be that bigger focus on not just us,
David,
but
if people want to find out about the Global Scot Network. If people want to find out about the Global Scot Network, how do they do that?
Global Scot website. it's been a revamped Global ScotNet website that has just literally gone a couple of weeks ago, gone live, sorry, a couple of weeks ago. So you can find out a bit more about Global Scots. You can request help, not so much from specific Global Scots, as I understand it. You can say, look, I'm wanting to understand more about this market or that market, or I'm looking for some advice. And we will almost try and match up. You know, there are about 650 Global Scots in total, well over 100 in energy, probably a bit more than, well, many more than 100 actually. And that number's increasing at the moment because we're wanting to increase our Global Scot network. My colleague Cornell, who's much more efficient than me,
they're all over the world.
As if by magic. Yeah, and they're all over the world, right? And we're actually, again, wanting to increase our Global Scot footprint in certain locations. So Cornell's just posted the link there. So find out more, but also talk to, if you don't have a contact at SDI, come to me and we'll try and help you find that. If you have a contact at SDI and you want to find out about partners or networks or opening doors, speak to your contact at SDI is my final point.
Right. So we have 5 minutes left before then the networking part of this event will start. So just a reminder to everybody listening in, I think it's been a fascinating conversation and still time for a last 1 or 2 questions. So I'm going to turn to John with a sort of an interpretation of a question that's come in from Hamish Mill around innovation. And my question to you is, are innovators better exporters? And I guess context to that is a little bit just, is it easier to sell to a conservative client if you are an innovator, or is it actually the other way around, which is you're less likely to comply with the client's requirements if you have too much innovation? And so in this world that we're now in, what's the role of innovation in order to grow internationally?
So I fundamentally think there is a massive role of kind of innovation to play. I think some of our experience has been, clients overseas or kind of in other sectors as well, want to see kind of how your core business, be it geographically or sector-wise, has used some of these things. So they've kind of got a reference point. And obviously that makes it that much easier to kind of sell. I was thinking around, we've been doing a lot in kind of pushing digital technologies, using those to kind of improve the efficiency, productivity of our operations and our project delivery. And we've very much tried to take our own medicine first. So we've got the kind of proof points, really the kind of real value cases associated with that, as we start to then take that overseas. The UK is actually, it's a good market in some ways for innovation. We're slightly more open to the use of digital technology. Some of the clients that we work with in some geographies are a little bit less so. Sometimes the use of digital can actually fly in the face of things like increasing local content requirements, because actually more digital you are, often the less people you have. And that's kind of against the kind of philosophy of some of our clients. Actually we found that being able to kind of have some friendly clients, and the clients that we've got some of the best relationships with are in the UKCS, and we've been able to use them as kind of test beds, ultimately kind of working with those clients. But really for me, it's a kind of find the clients that allow you to allow you that freedom to actually kind of try stuff out, and it's more a function of where the kind of strength of your relationship is, where the openness is. And one other observation we've had within some of the clients, where in the UK we've got a huge amount of kind of openness, a really great relationship that allows us to demo new things to them and even try them out on some of their assets and facilities. In other parts of the world, that client is completely against it and doesn't want to see anything new, just bid exactly to kind of the RFP, and they don't want to see kind of anything else. So it's also very kind of client asset, kind of geographically kind of driven as well as to kind of what that openness is. It's very much not universal at the moment.
Great, thank you. So what I'm going to do is, Alan, it looks like you're trying to speak. So I was going to say, what I'm going to do now, just in the interest of time, because I do want to finish on time, is I'm going to ask each of the panelists now to do a wrap-up comment for me on, obviously they've been participating in this and seeing the chat that's been coming through as well, which I think, thank you to everybody that's taken the time to put in some questions. If I can ask each of you just to do no more than 30 seconds, please, on kind of what you've taken from this and your and then I'll wrap up at the end. So Alan, I'll start with you, and no more than 30 seconds for each of you, please. Alan.
Yeah, it's been fantastic to hear other people's experiences of internationalization and diversification. And just picking up on the point that Jonathan was making there, we're finding the oil and gas, in particular, energy sector more generally, is becoming less conservative. And I think a lot of that is to do with the price of oil, to be honest, and the lower margins. And they have to look at innovation like other sectors, other non-related sectors. So it's been great. It also confirms what I think about, Mike mentioned about how it's, if you're in digital sector or the online sector, you've got more opportunity to internationalize. And we're certainly finding that as a digital business.
Thank you. Brittney.
What we've done as a business is, I guess, have a clear plan and strategy to how you want to develop internationally, but also you have to come back to that every so often, every few months, and actually make changes, because some things will work and some things won't, and you've got to be able to pivot around that. Something else we've done is we've had a dedicated team to grow internationally, so it's not down to the regions or the hubs. They're busy with their current clients. You almost have to step away from that. So we have a team, I've got 2 business development managers and myself, solely focused on internationalizing our business with new partners, new regions, taking the time and effort for the research, and using things like SDI a lot to do that. Yeah, that's my 30 seconds.
Thank you. John.
Brittney took my points. I just, again, I'll go back to the kind of be patient, have a plan, understand what the kind of off-ramps are to that plan, and also understand that, if you start getting traction, that, maybe you actually should kind of double down and actually kind of put more effort in. And, the way to really drive that, as Brittney was saying, is around, have dedicated kind of people, resource, headspace, budget to really make that happen. It's very difficult to ask people to do that type of new sector or new kind of geography kind of entry when it's on top of a day job, when they're kind of doing it in their kind of golden hours, evenings, weekends, and all the rest. So if you want to kind of make a material kind of change in your business, material growth, put the right kind of resources and time and effort behind it to really drive that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think companies serving the oil and gas sector would only try and diversify when there was an oil and gas downturn. Other industries probably saw us as relatively privileged and high margins and high pricing, and therefore wasn't an easy thing to do. I think the world has changed now, and what we've had from this discussion is just an insight, I think, into not only international diversification, but diversification into other sectors, into the energy transition, which just demonstrates really, we've got a very technically capable and extremely accomplished resource, which has led the world before. And I think we need to do everything we can to make sure that remains the case.
Brilliant. Thank you. And finally, David.
I think a couple of quick thoughts. Some of them alluded to already. I think whether they've been forced to or whether they want to, I think it's right that the traditional oil and gas sector is now much more curious and interested in other opportunities in other sectors. That's a good thing. I think it's important to try not do everything at the one time, and by that I mean be focused. Brittney mentioned this: be focused, but don't have one club in the bag. Have a couple of clubs in the bag that you think you can use, so you can change depending on as conditions or opportunities change. And then the third bit is really, and I would say this, wouldn't I? There is help out there, and thanks to those who've been complimentary to me and my team. Really appreciate that. And genuinely, actually, right now, hearing good things is good, right? So I appreciate that. And I think maybe my final point is that Mike and others allude to this, we've got a really good track record. Let's not be ashamed of that. Let's not be shy about it. I know particularly the Aberdonian default, and I am Aberdonian, so I can say this, is, to be a little bit shy and retiring about some of this. We've got a great track record of success. As we move into the next stage of energy, we've got real potential, not to solve everything, and other sectors will also solve the transition agenda, but we've got a great opportunity here, and we need to do everything we can to help, and we're prepared to do that.
That's a great way to wrap up, I think, what's been a tremendous, 75-minute session. It's gone by very quickly. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for taking the time and sharing their expertise. It's been fascinating, and actually, I think quite helpful for all of us. Obviously, I want to thank Petrasco as our sponsor, the wonderful people at OGV, Dan and Kenny, of course, and don't go, right? Because now it moves into the networking phase of the event. So continue the discussion as you move into the networking space. I guess, of course, it's fine if you want to go and get a cup of tea or something, but do come back because now the conversation continues. And those questions, I'm afraid I didn't get to every single question that came in, but we covered most of them. But if you feel that you still have more burning questions, then please now go to the networking space. And otherwise, thank you so much. And stay safe, everybody.
Click the networking icon on the left and it will all kick off automatically.
Yes.
And also,
let's give it a go.
And also, thank you very much, Stuart, for being such a good chairman of the panel discussion. Thank you.
Breaking up the fights, putting out the £5 mute tin. Exactly, I do my best. No, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure, a privilege.
Okay.
Thank you. See you in the networking space, everybody.
All right.